Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is Jake along with Scott, and today we're talking our second favorite spirit, American Single Malt, with people that are on the forefront of it. We have the CEO of Virginia Distillery Company. We have Gareth Moore joining us. Gareth, thank you for joining this episode of the Bourbon Lens.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you to Scott for making sure that I got that intro right in our pre-show text messages, because I would have said distilling company and I would have been wrong. So glad to be right.
You got it. Yep.
That's what I'm here for. How's everything in Virginia? Everything good?
We're not too far, right? Just the next Commonwealth over. We have about 230 years of our little split between Virginia and Kentucky, but we're getting over it, right? We're getting back together again. So
exactly.
Slowly but surely.
We both make good whiskey. That's the most important thing.
That's right. If you can't bond over making good whiskey, then how are you ever going to bond?
I mean, come on. And the subtle I-64 just kind of runs right through it.
That's right. I'm about a mile and a half from 64. So
So
the river runs through it.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. Well, Gareth, thank you for joining us. We were talking a little pre-show. We love American Single Malt here, and Virginia Distillery Company is definitely someone that has been on our list. We've talked about it. We've hit on all types of single malts, but particularly to talk to you tonight, the first question I have, it's not even really about the distillery. It's about the movement around American Single Malt. And so, this time last year, the TTB got the comment period finished and all of that. So, from your vantage point, what's the next step, or what's kind of on the horizon?
Yeah. So that TTB move last year was just the first part of the process. And so formal long government process, that was the notice of proposed rulemaking, NPRM. And that was more than a year ago now. They had a 60-day comment period, as you mentioned. And now we're just in the wait and see mode. We're fairly confident that the category is going to be ratified. And that's the next step, the formal ratification of the category. But as whiskey makers, we know how to be patient. And, if you're waiting a year or two, that could be a very short time in our industry.
Yeah, you haven't even been able to have a barrel come of age yet, right? At that point,
Yeah, exactly.
What's a year or two? So, for you, what's it been part of that, being part of that American Single Malt Commission and being part of this process to bring forth the first new legal category since when, Scott? Ever? Since bourbon?
Since bourbon, yeah. But
60
years ago?
Actually, I think the last modification to the whiskey category was in 1969 with a spirit light whiskey, something like that. So, before my lifetime. But it's great to be able to be part of something that is very rare, right? It doesn't happen most of your lifetime. And I'm glad the way you described it, American Single Malt as a movement, because that's really what the commission was able to kind of coalesce and bring together. On the front end, you think of the other folks that are around the table as being competitors, right? And you have to think through, all right, well, shoot, we're all trying to get our own thing out there. Between Westland and Balcones, Stranahan's, Westward, Copperworks, those were all the guys that were back there in 2016. And it didn't take a long time to realize that it's like, well, yeah, sure, we could be competitors, but we're also kind of brothers in arms of trying to get the same thing done, which is a worthy goal. Now 7 years into it, and I think working together is what turned it from just a goal of a government definition into, as you described it, as a movement, because it's resulted in a lot of collaboration. It's resulted a lot of great relationships, friendships amongst the different distillers, and I like to be on a first name basis with all those distilleries that I just mentioned, because it's folks that have become friends over the years. And once we get the category formalized, which has really been the primary goal of the American Single Malt Commission, we still have a lot of work to do. Right, that's getting the government to say, here's a formal category that we're going to recognize. But getting it into industry, from distributors to accounts, and then ultimately consumers, to learn all about the category, because people know about bourbon, people know about rye, American Single Malt is just a tiny fraction of the market. It's the fastest growing part of the market. And so getting that education part about that, about the category is going to be a critical next step.
Yeah. And I think it's super interesting to look at that from an adoption standpoint. And we hit on this a little bit beforehand. It's not that only these craft players that have pushed this movement forward are playing in this space now. In the last 2 to 3 years, you've seen Jack Daniel's come out with an international release for it. You have Jim Beam entering the fray. We have it on record from Colin at Heaven Hill that they have malt whiskey that they are, that they put back 20 years ago that they're waiting to see what they can do with it.
Yeah.
Buffalo Trace came out with a peated bourbon. So they're like experiencing like some of the elements of single malt. So, you have all of these main distillers. Oh, and this little thing in Lawrenceburg, Indiana has put out a crap ton of American Single Malt as well. Yep. If you haven't been paying attention to that. So it's kind of cool to see the big players in the industry say, hey, these guys who have been pushing this movement, people are catching on. We need to be a part of that.
No, exactly. And it's amazing to, when we compare ourselves to single malt in Scotland or Ireland that have been doing it for hundreds of years. And, here we are just over a decade. It's pretty cool to have products on the shelf that, are there before a Jack Daniel's or before a Jim Beam and some of those other guys. So kind of being the older, wiser guys somehow, despite our relative youth.
Yeah, now they're playing catch up, which is pretty evident. I mean, I know that we started paying attention to American Single Malt. We've been doing the podcast for 5 years now. And I think 4 years ago, after discussing, bourbon ad nauseum, we started like hearing about what is this American Single Malt. Then we started diving into it. And Virginia Distillery was one of the first that popped up on our radar. And it's like, we got to figure out what this stuff is.
Yeah.
Telling Jake, it's like, if we don't pay attention, it's going to pass us by.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I mean, the coolest part about the industry being relatively nascent is that it's not a bunch of incumbents that have been doing it for decades or centuries, where they say this is exactly the way that this should be done. Very little room for innovation. Consumers kind of drinking what their grandfather or great grandfather drank. But in American Single Malt, because it's brand new, there's tons of room for innovation from the type of stills that are being used, the type of malt that's being used, definitely the type of casks that are being used. And when we look at the definition that the American Single Malt Commission has been trying to get ratified, it's really simple. There are a couple different tenets of it that fit within just what American whiskey in general is defined as. And so the unique things are really just the two parts that single malt has been defined as by Scotland, by Ireland, by Japan, other areas that make single malt. It's 100% malted barley that's made of one distillery. So it's not that complicated, and it's not as restrictive as some other countries have on single malts in terms of what the age statement has to be, what type of casks you're allowed to use, and so on. So it's an exciting time in the industry.
Oh, 100%. And, we'll look forward to what the next 10 years have in store, right? Like that's the exciting
Absolutely.
thing. And because you all have kind of been at the forefront of that, and being able to have your product unfortunately coincide with the release around COVID, there's been an opportunity to be more digital, to be more nimble, because you aren't beholden to the shelves like a large scale producer is. You've probably been able to manipulate a little bit more. But the first step, I'm going to go back now after we talked about the movement. Let's talk about yourself and Virginia. Why American Single Malt? Right. Like
that's a good question.
I feel like that's the question I have, because there was so much whiskey being made in Virginia, and obviously probably rum and rye whiskey as well, back in the day. Like, why not bourbon? Why rye whiskey, or why American Single Malt?
Yeah. So making that choice for American Single Malt and being 12 years past when the company was founded, definitely seems like a great idea. on the front end, it seemed like a funny idea. And now that it's been successful, I would love to take credit for it. But ultimately, it was my late father's dream. He was Irish immigrant along with my mother. They were high school sweethearts. Dad went to University College Dublin, and he was a scholarship kid. Didn't come from the greatest background, but was big in academics. And after getting a scholarship to University College Dublin, he had a professor that was 12 years older than him, a guy named Sean Teeling, who is also in the whiskey industry in Ireland now. And he took my father under his wing and helped him get his next scholarship to the U.S. To George Washington University. Mom followed, and they raised a family out here. Dad was a little overeducated with all these different master's degree and a PhD, but it helped him move on to kind of live out the American dream, which we talk a lot about what the American dream is. But as a kid, it was awesome to be able to witness firsthand that the American dream, is still what it has been for many years. And my dad made it really big in tech industries, data and analytics, way before you had big computing power and that sort of stuff. And we lived in Virginia. Why? Because it was right across the river from where he got his scholarship at George Washington in Washington, D.C. And so he built a few companies, sold a few companies, and when he sold his largest company in 2011, he wasn't one to really sit still. And so he put together the idea for his next company, and he was kind of at retirement at that point, and decided rather than tech, he wanted to do it in something that he personally was passionate about, which was single malt. Now, of course, being Irish, you'd think, why are you into a traditionally Scottish product? But there are Irish single malts out there as well. And people from Kentucky can like Virginia whiskey. People from Virginia can like Kentucky whiskey, right? But he was always very big into single malts. He would visit Scotland, go to the distilleries, had a massive collection. He was trying to get a collection of every single active distillery in Scotland, even the small boutique type ones. And in fact, a really interesting story, just bringing it kind of full circle, was in 1982, the year I was born. The marketing team at suddenly slipped my mind. It was at Abalur. They came up with this idea that we're going to sell casks that are going to be called the Millennium casks. And there's this huge year that's coming up in 18 years, and we're going to have 18-year whiskey that we're going to call the Millennium, before people were even thinking about the Millennium in 1982. And so my mother bought my father a cask of one of the Millennium casks that wasn't bottled until 2000. But that was just something that I noticed growing up. Right, you get the samples from Abalur. You have that little certificate on the wall. Dad was doing all these trips, and so it kind of made sense when he was having, I don't know, he wouldn't have liked me to call it a retirement project, but to do something that he was really passionate about versus data and analytics. So that was in 2011, and he got off the races with consultants from Scotland to help engineer the facility. Got some land, Nelson County, and started construction. And that was 2011. About 18 months into it, summer of 2013, took a heart attack and passed. The males in our family don't have the greatest hearts, so gotta watch out for myself here. But it was completely unexpected and kind of a shock to all of us. And at the time, I was in no way involved with the distillery. He and I had been working on some other things. My background is in finance, private equity. Dad and I were looking at private equity investments in technology businesses. Very boring technology businesses. Technology, you have the great, sexy, cool stuff like social media and fast, rapid growth retail businesses. But
transactional dry cleaning holding companies.
What's this?
Oh, it's a reference from Parks and Recreation. One of
Okay.
one of the best investments that they talk about is a transactional dry cleaning holding company.
I mean, it could be. So that's that sort of thing, right? Where to on its content, it's not very exciting. But to me, that was more exciting than whiskey because, to be dead honest, I kind of thought of it as a bit of a lark. Like, all right, great, like whiskey. I know this portion of the competition of drinking, but I didn't really think of it as a real business. And when my father passed, my mother, I remember where I was sitting when she said, "All right, go down to Nelson County, see what your dad was up to." And at that time, I probably could have said no. I said, "All right, I'll go check it out." And went down there and saw the scale that Dad was looking to start at, which was a pretty large scale for a craft distillery. And at that point, I was very naive. I didn't know anything about whiskey. I didn't know anything about manufacturing. I didn't know anything about retail, consumer products. But I did know that it was something that we wanted to see through. It's a passion project in its early phases, and again, being very naive, I thought it'd be much easier than it was, from completing construction to actually turning on the stills to building up the inventory to getting the brand out on the shelf. But over time, it became my own passion, and I won't lie and say that I was into American Single Malt in third grade, and it was always my lifelong dream. It was kind of an inherited dream, and naturally, it just became a passion.
For sure. I mean, I think that's it's powerful. I mean, to be able to be connected to that. Scott, it looks like you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to ask. So, when did you guys actually fire up the stills and start making whiskey or start distilling anything?
Yeah, that'd be November of 2015. So, just about 8 years ago now.
So then, about 4 years after he had started, really, I guess.
Yeah, getting the idea. So,
yeah,
it took longer than I mean, I think ideally you'd be able to get it done in a year, but he was working on it for about 18 months before he passed. It took me another 18 months after that. And we got it working.
I feel like that's a great way to just honor your father's legacy, right? To be able to do that. And I'm sure, for yourself, like every day when you wake up and you get to do this, you're like, you feel your dad probably near, right? My dad's one of my best friends. And like, whenever that day comes and he goes, we've had some scary moments along the way. You want to find stuff that you feel the essence of those people near you because they made you the person you are today. So, I mean, I think that's really cool that you're able to fill in.
Yeah, absolutely. And
the
name of our product, Courage and Conviction, which is also the name of my dogs on the floor back there. There's two dogs. One's Courage, one's Conviction. But that name was really, I think, the kind of height of just honoring the legacy, because it was a saying that my father liked to use. I don't know that he came up with it, but the saying was, always have the courage of your convictions. The idea being that if you have a deep conviction in something, if you really believe in something, let that be the power that kind of guides you to what you're trying to do. And that's kind of what we did in building out the distillery. Building out the distillery, building out the brand, and it just seemed very, very natural to use that as part of it. But one interesting thing I think about is that at the distillery, there's none of the staff that actually knew him. We staffed up. We have one employee that isn't there anymore when my father was living. Now we're 42 folks in the company, and nobody actually had met him or knew him, but they all have these different sayings. They all have these different values that they learned that he held, and try to run the business that way. And I think more than saying a flavor profile or a bottle captures somebody's spirit. My dad was a business guy. He was proud of being a businessman. When I was a kid, when they said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to be a businessman." They said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, my dad just sits on the phone all day and says bad words to people. And all these years later, great success. That's what I can do now. Sit on the phone all day and say bad words to people. But really, I mean, with him being a business guy at heart, the way he ran businesses and the way that, he was able to lead people is definitely, I think, more of the legacy than I could say about the juice or the brand or anything like that.
I was going to say, it definitely takes a lot of grit. It's, I'm sure he put in a lot of work just to get the idea going. And then for you to come in and finish the project and then actually continue and keep it going. I mean, it just takes so much grit just to run any business today. As frustrating as a lot of elements can be, but
a lot of things have to go wrong. Yeah. A lot of things have to go wrong. And, I was laughing about this with my mom the other day of, if he hadn't passed and he was running this business, well, shoot, maybe he'd be farther along, and he certainly wouldn't have made a lot of the mistakes I made because he had that experience. But, mom, with her wisdom, made the point that it's like, all right, well, now you have the experience, right? That's how you get experience is through making a lot of mistakes and, cutting your teeth on business.
I mean, my mom always said, fail fast, right? Because you gotta learn from those mistakes and go on, and to be able to pick yourself up and go through that from a traumatic perspective, right? Losing people ain't easy. And so to be able to do that, and you keep saying Nelson County, and I just have to say, guys, there's a similarity there. Nelson County is Bardstown. Right. Nelson County is the home of Virginia Distillery Company. There's a reason why we're on this call, guys. Like, even though neither of us live in Nelson County, but that's the heart of bourbon country right there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, strangely enough, it's the same guy. It was Governor Nelson of Virginia. And he was a governor sometime before 1792. And so when Kentucky split off, there was some sort of movement by his great grandkids or something like that, pointing out that the original Nelson County was no longer Virginia. It was over in Kentucky. He was the governor of Virginia. And so Amherst County and Albemarle County both split off their northern and southern parts respectively and created Nelson County, Virginia. So we're distilling both sides of the border there in Nelson County.
Some damn good whiskey in both of those counties.
There you go.
So we've hit the background. Now let's talk a little technical pieces of this. So
sure.
Obviously 100% malted barley, new cooperage, and then you have a line of finished products. So you are using a finishing agent or a used cooperage.
Yeah, we're actually 100% used cooperage. So
you're using used cooperage from start to finish.
100%. Yeah. So it's primary maturation that's in those used casks. But being in Scotland, that would take years and years and years to get flavor out of a used cask. But in Virginia, we're able to get it much faster with a climate just like yours in Kentucky. It gets hot and humid, it gets cold and dry, and turns out that's a great recipe for good whiskey.
So that's a really, really good point, right? So I just learned something new today. And are you all utilizing traditional ricking? Are you all utilizing palletization? How are you all aging your barrels?
Yeah, we're palletizing. It's very efficient. It's very easy to access them. For sampling, figuring out what we want to take out of there. And given that we're trying to use each of the seasons, having them all packed very closely together helps kind of insulate them season to season. So, it'll get at its coldest point maybe in February, but when you get into the warehouse in April, when it's finally warm outside, it's still very chilly inside because the casks, they're kind of retaining the cool. And then likewise, if you're there in November, December, you still have some of that heat that's been in the casks since the summertime that kind of has its own insulating effect.
Yeah, no, I think that's super interesting. Scott, is this the first American Single Malt that we've talked to that has done used cooperage solely?
I think it's probably pretty blended. I mean, there are some
most that you see is either 100% new or a blend of new and used, whether that's primary maturation or finishing. Uh, and we've kind of taken a more traditional approach, which is kind of cool. I was talking about earlier that there's all these different styles, a lot of innovation in the category. But it is nice that in the decade or two that you had craft guys like us distilling American Single Malt, that there are different styles that are emerging from what we have with Balcones in Texas, the climate they have there, or Mile High with Stranahan's, damp Pacific Northwest with Westward or Westland. It's kind of cool, and so we kind of think of ourselves as being geographically the closest to the old world, Scotland, Ireland, and so on. That closest in style to the old world as well.
For sure. And so the idea of terroir shows up too, right? Like, so you're going to be a little bit closer to the ocean than most, right? There's the single malt that sits on Nantucket that obviously is getting all of that. I forget the name of it. I think it's 888 maybe is the right one.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Look at me and my American Single Malt knowledge. Woohoo. Maybe I could pass that test, Scott. Probably not. And, for you all, like how does that play into it from a terroir perspective? Are you getting barley close? Are you all sourcing grain from a far away? Like, how does that work for you all?
Yeah, for grain, we're looking at it. We use our Scottish consultants, their great wisdom, and Harry Coburn, who was our engineering consultant. He had a great quote that he didn't care to hear where the barley may have gone to prep school. He cared about the certificate of analysis, where it says, here's the amount of nitrogen, here's the amount of each type of sugar that's in the malt. And so we look to get the highest quality malt. Turns out that's where malt grows naturally, or not naturally, but easily in the upper Midwest, brewing country. So that's where we get our malt. And, we've had folks ask, well, why aren't we using Virginia malt? Virginia doesn't make a lot of malt. And what they are able to do isn't going to be the highest quality for distilling. It could be good for brewing and maybe even as an adjunct to bourbon, and it is part of a larger mash bill. But if we were to get a ideal malt at Virginia, we would need to have an irrigation regimen that isn't very natural. We would need to have a fertilization regimen that would be putting tons of nitrogen into the product that we don't want. And ultimately, it would not be a very environmentally friendly approach to try to grow malt where it just shouldn't grow. And if it did grow there, we probably wouldn't have never had bourbon in the first place, right? We learned in kindergarten that pilgrims came and Native Americans helped them figure out how to put it was a fish in the ground with some corn, and that would grow corn. And so naturally is having that in abundance led to what Virginia started and what Kentucky became in terms of bourbon. And if it was malt, we probably just would have been a single malt country as well.
Sorry, I'm over here just like huffing these glasses
Jake's
because
intense into tasting notes right now.
Well, I am
good place to be.
So before the call, I had only drank one. Now we're 30 minutes in. I'm on number 4.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I'm starting to catch it.
Which one was your favorite?
I've not drank the sherry cask yet. So
you don't know.
As of right now, if I were to rank them,
The front runner, shockingly, would be the cuvee.
Okay.
And then I'd go the traditional distillate and then the bourbon cask.
Okay.
I think the boldness of the cuvee, I really like the red fruits on that, like red apple, raspberry. It kind of fit the seasonality, like it fits fall, right? It's got a little nutmeg, a little cinnamon in it, where the bourbon cask is a little light from just a flavor perspective. And so I thought the traditional cask was a little more bold. But I'm not mad at any of them.
That's great to hear. The single cask, the single barrel that we do of the cuvee is definitely my favorite product. I think it does really, really nicely at the higher strength. And get
Well,
some great flavors to come out.
and so that's the other thing, right? So the proof not all, is everything like the traditional core lineup. So the core lineup is the traditional, the bourbon cask, the cuvee, the sherry, right? And they're all 92
Right.
proof.
They're all at 92, and then we also do single casks that are differ because obviously it's just whatever comes out of the cask, and so those are somewhere between 58 and 61, 62.
Oh wow! So you're getting some in the 120s.
Yeah,
Nice.
Yeah, getting some heat.
And for you all from a distillation process, are you all traditional pot stills? Are you all using column or hybrid? How's it work for you all?
Yeah, so no, we're very traditional. It's a traditional precise system, 10,000 liters, 2 pot stills, double distillation, semi-louder mash tun, full spot them to get a nice clean wort, and eight washbacks, and put that all together, and you got a nice little system.
Seems like you all know what you're all doing when it comes to making whiskey, and seems like your dad made sure he had the right consultants hired when he started this project.
He did exactly. And you kind of have to know what you don't know, right? Where you have to not try to experiment your way out of something, but trying to learn lessons where they're to be had. And that's a big point of what we're trying to do is not reinventing the wheel, but taking the best of the old world, the tried and true techniques, and then trying to do a few little things differently that makes it truly American. And the number one thing is really just location. Being in a much more extreme climate that compared to Scotland or Ireland or Japan, that hot summers, hot and humid summers, and cold and dry winters. So that gives it a nice kind of sense of place, right? That having that location with that climate is really what differentiates it versus trying to success was never recreating Scotch single malt, right? I mean, if we were trying to do that, well, why wouldn't we just build a distillery in Scotland, right? But when you think of it, like the American tradition of immigrants bringing things from the old world and Americanizing them, whether you're thinking of older things like hamburgers or hot dogs, coming from a Frankfurter, or pizza, pasta, things anything that you can order from Domino's, right? They're not just copying the old world and trying to make it exactly. I mean, Frankfurt is nothing like what you would have in Frankfurt, right? It's an American hot dog. They're adapted for the American taste, and they're made uniquely American. And that's something that I think we've been able to do, is not just simply recreate something in the old world, but create it in the new world, making it unique and an American product.
Yeah, no, I think that's super interesting.
I think that's what's so exciting about American Single Malt, just in general. It's like the modern whiskey drinker, as I view them, is looking for experimentation, is looking for something different, is looking for something that might not be on the shelf the next week. It might be more limited, limited edition, things like that. Yep. I think that's what is exciting about American Single Malt, is that it embraces that. It says, we've got these limited releases. Yes, it's a single malt like they did in Scotland, or like they do in Scotland, but we're trying to also be uniquely different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're not afraid of it either. And I think, going back to one of our American Single Malt episodes, I think it was with Matt from Westland. We're talking about American Single Malt as a category, and the goal is to not be restrictive, but it's to be, I think what he actually said was, the goal is to be prescriptive, have rules around it, but not be restrictive.
Yeah.
And I think that's just what it's so exciting about American Single Malt right now, in the era that we're living in. And I'm excited to see where it continues to go too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the category is very broad, and just those two rules of being 100% malted barley and distilled at one distillery, that wasn't even a uniquely American idea. It's that consumers understand that, right, from Scotland and from Ireland and beyond. And so when they have that expectation, it does make sense that we carry that same definition in the U.S. But we don't need to make it more restrictive around the types of casks or the types of stills or the age or anything like that, because the category is still very young and still a lot of room for growth, a lot of room for experimentation.
Mm-hmm. And I have an update. The sherry cask now goes to number 2.
Number 2, okay,
yeah.
Okay, got it. But it's great to have these different types, because people say variety is the spice of life, and kind of like religion and politics. I mean, I've certainly had people that would say, well, the bourbon cask, it's kind of neutral, it's kind of boring, and then you have other people that love it and say, well, that cuvee cask or the sherry cask, that's a candy whiskey, right? I couldn't drink that. But that's always great. I mean, it's like having somebody that's going to be, arguing about which of your kids is the best.
Yeah. Well,
I can't say, but yeah,
it's some days I can say
it's a time and a place thing, right? Like it's think about when we're drinking at 9:30 at night. It's a little bit in the fall. There's a little nip in the air right now. So those two kind of
finally shit. It's been 100 degrees.
Oh, I know, but it's 58 now. So. 61 on Saturday. Can't wait. Perfect day for Kentucky to beat Georgia in football.
There you go.
Exactly. So I have everything lined up for that. And I may enjoy some courage and conviction, because I'm convicted to have some courage about them picking them to win right here on the podcast.
There you go.
It's going to come out late.
That should be use that to be the power to make your bets.
Exactly. But the thing that I like about the whiskeys in general is, because of the finishes, it does manipulate the distillate a little bit, right? So where there's a note of apple on the 2 lighter type of, like one that's non-finished and the bourbon cask, then you get into the cuvee and the sherry, and it starts to morph into a little red apple and red fruits and jammy, and some milk chocolate starts to show up. So it's like, the finishes allow for the distillate to take on a little bit of different flavor complexities. And so that's what's been fun about the ride around the 4 of these, is that you had this really nice, bright apple, like tasty distillate that the apples changed over the course of that. And Scott, I know you have a little bit older batches. Like, what kind of ride did you go on throughout that experience?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, because what you were saying is the variety is, it's kind of like a pre-dinner drink, like maybe a dinner drink, and there's probably like 2 on here that are like kind of after dinner, more desserty.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I envision this, and that was, the courage and conviction is kind of the, I guess, the appetizer, like it whets your palate for, the lighter, the fruitier, the apple and the vanilla, they just explode out of the glass in that one. And then you kind of just work your way up in the flavor wheel, I guess you could say. So, the bourbon cask.
We only make one type of distillate, right? I mean, it all comes out of the stills, looking the same. We don't change up the grain or the yeast or many cycles. It's as Henry Ford said, you can have any flavor or any color of Model T, so long as you like black, right? So we only make that one type, but it makes a very wide range of whiskeys just based on the casks.
Yeah, and I think that's what's fun is when you can taste the base distillate and then see how it's manipulated. Then you got a good product, right? Like, I'm not probably the first person to tell you this. I'm not going to be the last, but like, just keep doing what you're doing, because it's good. Like,
yeah. And if something's working, we're not going to stop it, right?
For sure.
It seems to be working.
Well, and this is an approachable to both bourbon and single malt drinkers, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm the most sophisticated palate when it comes to Scotch or like Irish single malt, but I know enough to be dangerous and to say like, hey, I've had some Scotch or Irish single malts that kind of fit in this vein. And I've had some bourbons that are similarly close from a finished perspective. So it's like you could get both of those types of people into the conversation relatively easy, where some of them, like our friends in the Southwest, adding mesquite smoke or adding that, which could be a little more abrasive, and that may, turn on to the Isla folk. They're probably like eating all that stuff up. This is not abrasive. It does lend to the traditional Scotch feel because of how you're doing it, but it's got a lot of flavor in what you're doing. So I'm super impressed. First time I've ever drank this on hands.
Awesome.
God, so
well, I'm very glad to hear that. It's like having your kid score in the flag football game, right? It's always proud of the products.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I was texting Jake before the podcast, and I said, "Oh, you're in for a treat," because he said, "I've only tasted the one." It's like, "Oh, you're in for a treat." So
awesome, great to hear.
So, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about educating the consumer, and I think that's a big component about American Single Malt and what some of the distilleries, such as Virginia, have to contend with about educating the consumer. So, I got to pat myself on the back. I just completed it. The American Single Malt Academy sounds incredible. I'm going to have a certificate. I'm going to put it on the wall when it arrives.
Yep. You're going to get a pin as well. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Great. For my lapel. Perfect. So that is something that was started by Virginia. So I'm going to just lead to you and just say, what is the Academy and how can people check it out? And, and I can obviously talk about my experience with it, but kind of like to hear it from you guys.
Absolutely. So education's always been a big part of the brand because, as I keep saying, it's a very new category, right? And so you're not going to find a huge section of books on the shelf about American Single Malt. And so kind of following years of, telling everybody about the product, about the category, we decided to formalize it with a website that we call ASM Academy, where you can go enroll in the academy. It's free. You register and you complete the course, and then you get a certificate at the end. And we go through different topics from defining the category. What exactly is it? Comparing it to other single malts, comparing it to American whiskeys, going through production methods, casks, science, and art, all of that great stuff. And ultimately, it leads to people being able to speak a lot more intelligently about the category. And that's everybody from industry folks like yourselves to everyday consumers who kind of preach the good word about American Single Malt.
Yeah, I mean, the production value of the Academy and the programming was like top notch. I mean, the videos, it was just, I described this before the podcast, but it was just like the most compact amount of information in 25, 30 minute like snippets. It was just like, I completed it over the past like week and a half just because, here, there, and everywhere I was trying to squeeze it in. But just going back, I'm just like, there's a lot of content there, and it's just exciting to see like American Single Malt as a category. This is where it's going to be going in the next few years, and people are going to be talking about it. And we all rattle off the rules for bourbon, we all rattle off the rules for bottled and bond, and eventually I think we'll get to it to where it'll be American Single Malt. Like these are the categories. Like this is how you fit the category.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of a really, really long-term vision, having different subsets of American Single Malt would be an amazing accomplishment, whether it's in my lifetime or beyond. But the same way you do in Scotland between Highland and Speyside and Islay, Campbelltown, and so on. It would be great if at some point we had Texas style, and Pacific Northwest style, and Rocky Mountain style, and who knows what other types of styles we'll be able to define. But it takes time. It takes time to make whiskey, so it takes time to make a category, and it takes time to make subsets of that category. But as long as we're continuing to grow and develop the category further, I'll be really happy.
So it's interesting that you brought that up, because I think we've talked about it with a lot of our American Single Malt guests. And talking about the regionality of single malt, we've got the Pacific Northwest and Texas, and now like the Southwest, and what Jake was just talking about with like the mesquite, the smokiness, and things like that. But how would you characterize like a Virginia, or like I don't know, would you say like Appalachian or a coastal single malt? What would you say? Like, where would Virginia kind of fall in, where maybe you see yourself in like 15, 20 years, whenever that happens?
Yeah. So, I mean, to really define the region, we would have to have, more producers nearby. But for now, I mean, it's really us. And I think the things that really differentiate us within the category within the U.S. Is, number one, we're using the traditional pot stills versus a hybrid still or a column still. And two, we're using 100% used wood versus new cooperage. And so, I sometimes think about that as a matrix of, one axis having, the pot stills versus column stills and hybrid in the middle. And then, left or right on the axis, you have new wood to used wood and a combination of them. And so you can kind of plot out the different distilleries. You'd have a group like Stranahan's that would be, hybrid stills and 100% new cooperage that would be in one corner. And then you would have us with pot stills and 100% used cooperage in the other corner. And then, others around the middle, Westland, Westward, use a combination of both. Balcones has pot stills, but they're primarily new wood. So I think, in defining ourselves, we're in that category that is more traditional because of the pot stills and the used wood. And so we're going to be a lot closer to the old world single malts than the new world single malts.
Gotcha. I wonder if Clay, is it Risen or Risen? I wonder if Clay Risen is working on his next book, which is going to be the American Single Malt book. I wonder if he'll have some sort of chart like that. I think that would be very interesting.
I might have to text him. We'll see.
Yeah, I've read his rye book, and I've thumbed through the Bourbon book, but I'm like, I mean, that's just like, it's the nerdy question that we always seem to ask, like with our American Single Malt guests. It's just like, what are the regions? Are they defined enough? But I think what you said is you need to have a few more distilleries in your region to actually know what that might kind of develop to.
Right. I mean, right now, in terms of scale, the ASM is still, under 1% of all American whiskey. So obviously that means there's a ton of room for growth. But when I think of an example, 25 years ago, you had bourbon and everything else was American whiskey, right? And 10 or 15 years ago, it became bourbon, rye, and everything else. And so, I'm really hopeful that in the next 10, 15 years, we'll have bourbon, rye, American Single Malt, and everything else. Taking American Single Malt out of that kind of miscellaneous category, and really putting it on the map in terms of scale.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I always like to throw out, like, as everyone talks about terroir and like having like a regionality, it's like Pacific Northwest. You're like, oh, this is, that's going to be their thing. And then it's like McCarthy's just kind of stands out as this like oddball peated whiskey, which like if you're a Lafroig fan or an Ardbeg fan, just go get you some McCarthy's and you found your favorite American single malt. From an old world perspective, have you all even thought about playing around with peat or anything like that?
We have some experiments that are on the malt, but more on the cask style. So using peated casks and even, one thing that you got to try weird stuff, but there's two ways you can get peat into a whiskey. You can get it through the malt, through the malting process and the smoke of the peat using to halt germination. But it's also in the water. Depending where your water source is. So like Speyside whiskeys coming from the River Spey, they'll collect their reducing waters. Spey means flood. So when the River Spey is in Spey, when it's flooding its banks and going into fields, being able to take some of that peated flavor into the water, a lot of producers over there will collect that water, and it's much, much more subtle than what you're going to see in Islay. but it's another way to do it. So we're looking at ways where we can kind of use a peated water as reduction water to influence the product. I don't know if it's going to work, but try some of those techniques that have worked elsewhere. See if we can make it work in the U.S. And if it works, you'll see it on the shelf, and if it doesn't, then you'll see it on my home bar shelf. So.
For sure, it's like spaghetti. If it's ready, it sticks to the wall. If it doesn't, it falls off, and you pick it up and either throw it away or your dog eats it.
That's right.
Like all things whiskey, it's worth a shot.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things we haven't hit on, and obviously it's a craft, right? From a product perspective. One of the things I thought early on barrier to entry was price, but I think price creep around all whiskey in general has just continued to go up and has caught American Single Malt from a craft perspective. Where do your all's bottles traditionally kind of come in from an MSRP perspective?
Yeah, so the SRP on the signature malt, so that's the traditional one in the blue packaging, $69.99, and then it goes up to $79.99 for the individual cask types: bourbon cask, cuvee cask, sherry cask. And while I said that we started at a larger scale than traditional craft, we certainly don't have the scale that large producers in Kentucky or Scotland do that can drive our costs down. So it's good to see that consumers are not balking at those prices as they see the big producer, the supply and demand dynamics drive up the prices, and then small producers like ourselves, it's really the underlying economics of being relatively small.
Yeah. Well, no, and I think that's the interesting thing is like people are like, oh, well, it's 4 to 5 year old whiskey or 6, 7 year old whiskey, whatever it is. But I'm like, have you seen someone slap a label on something recently? It's probably 5 to 6 years old and it's $70. So, for somebody who's actually making it versus sourcing and slapping a label on it, and people don't understand the dynamics of that. They get mad about it. Taxes are a real thing, everybody. I will say it here now, say it loud. You deal with bulk spirits and potentially selling those off. Like when people buy that, they have to pay Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam is going to get his cut no matter what. And
that's right.
And that's going to influence a lot of barrel prices and bottle prices along the way. So I was just curious, kind of where you all sat, which I think for a craft product, 4 to 6 years old, that's a price point like I can afford. Like it's not going to be an everyday bottle, but it's going to be a bottle that I could go out and say, hey, I've done something good. This is a bottle that I can appreciate. I have a connection to it, and I can enjoy drinking it over and over again with friends and family. And I look for those bottles. Like when I purchase stuff with my hard-earned money, like I want something I can either make a conversation about or something that I can just enjoy over a couple months. And this is something that I know I can get behind from a purchase perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, that's what we're trying to do is give the consumer something they can be proud to have on their shelf or proud to gift or proud to have a good conversation over. One of the things on age statements that we run into is the idea that, well, you're selling early because it's a economic proposition. Not really, because the amount of evaporation that we get in 4, 5, 6 years is what's going to take 12 years in Scotland to evaporate. And so we see about 18-20% over that time frame. That's the same that Scotland's going to see in about 12 years. And so it's not an economic proposition of not having less losses. We have the same losses just in a shorter period of time, which can be very bothersome every time you walk into the cask houses. And, it smells delicious. Not necessarily to me. It's kind of lost profits to me as we smell all that evaporation.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you on that. But the most exciting thing is that the path forward has been forged, and now it's just continuing down that path to ensure that adoption and then ultimately consumer buy-in, right? Like that's what you're looking at from a next steps perspective. So with that being said, we want to let you self-promote a little bit here at the end. Where can people learn more about Virginia Distillery Company? just holistically, and where can they pick up, where can they find out like how to buy the whiskey?
Yeah, no, our website does that right up in front, vadistillery.com. And for ASM Academy, that's simple, asmacademy.com. But on our website, we have a whiskey finder. Either you can order it online from various retail partners, or you can go to a local store. We're in 24 states, and we have pretty good distribution base. We're in pretty much every Total Wine, big in chains in Texas, Florida, a couple other states. But any of the consumers, any of the listeners can go to vadistillery.com and pretty quickly figure out where to get a bottle.
And they are distributed in the great Commonwealth of Kentucky.
We ship to Kentucky right now, and
yeah.
If you know a very good distributor that'll put us everywhere, definitely let me know.
I'm sure there's somebody that would be interested in picking up a great American Single Malt along the way. We know a
Absolutely.
few folks. Well, truly appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you tonight.
Thank you.
Excited about the future for Virginia Distillery Company, and look forward to seeing what's next. Because I know that will prompt our next conversation more than likely, is making sure that we're keeping up with what's happening there in Nelson County, Virginia.
Absolutely. Well, I enjoyed the conversation. I always like talking about our product, about the company, and where we've come from, and more excitingly, where we're going.
Yeah. Well, appreciate it as always. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. You can find out more about Bourbon Lens over at Instagram, X, and Facebook at Bourbon Lens. You can drop us a line at info@bourbonlens.com if you have any questions for Scott and I. And last but not least, we want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members. If you are interested in joining that, go over to patreon.com/bourbonlens, and we'd love to have you join that growing community. And make sure you download this on your favorite podcast listening app. We'd love to be on your commute or wherever you are going on your latest travels. So until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.